I think you're going to find this video surprisingly interesting and helpful. We're going to get a firm understanding of the Quasar docs and how the docs relate to what we're building inside of our editor. Okay, so let's head on over to quasar.dev, which is the Quasar docs website. And if we open up this left menu here, notice this second option, the API Explorer. And it's intentional that this is the second option because this is a place which works as a really good starting point. So let's go ahead and click on there. And this is a single place that shows you just about everything Quasar can do. And it's awesome. So check this out. We can search for QTable to find Quasar's table component, or we can just scroll down the list here to get a really good understanding of everything that Quasar can do. It's a pretty long list. But again, we're just going to type in table and then select QTable. Next, we get what's called an API card. Might look like a lot to begin with. The first thing to look at is these top tabs here. These are basically all of the things related to the table component. And in the next couple of videos, we're going to go over these 5 categories and show what they look like in code. And I got to tell you, the Quasar devs I've worked with that understand these API cards tend to have a much, much deeper understanding of the framework. So I'd love to share this knowledge with you. Okay, let's do it. First, we'll click on Docs, which is going to take us to the QTable docs. And if we scroll down a little bit here, once again, there's the API card. But now that we're on the docs page, I'll just make this full screen, we can see everything that QTable has to offer. Lots and lots and lots of examples. But for the most part, and in this video, all we really care about is this section here, the API card. Okay, throwing that back on the left side, let's see how we can use it. First up, we'll need some data to play around with. Coming up here, let's say const friends. We're going to have a table that shows a bunch of friends, and we'll set that equal to an array. And a friend's going to have a name, so I'm going to set that equal to Lugu, which is what my friends call me. Kind of weird that I'm building an app that has my own name as the first friend in the list. I am my own friend. And then for the email, luke@ldbold.com. That's my email address. Oh, and we want that wrapped in an object. So this is an idea of what you might get from an API. Often when we fetch data, we get an array of objects where all of the keys in those objects are the same. So let's add a comma here, and then Control-C, Control-V, 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 and I'll add a couple more. My partner is Shannon, and her email is going to be shannon@ldbold.com, and we have 2 beautiful dogs. One of them's a Chihuahua called Panda, and one of them is a not-so-little Chihuahua called Lily. And there we go. Next up, I want some UUIDs, so I'm going to click there, Shift-Alt, down, 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 space, ID is equal to an empty string. And now let's use a website to just generate 4 unique IDs. Coming up here, GUIDgenerator.com. You can use whatever you like. And honestly, you could type anything inside of here. And I'm going to generate 4 UUIDs. Click on this generate button and then copy those results. Next, we click here. And I'll show you a quick way that we can use our editor to take these IDs and then put them in the right place. So if we click here, Shift-Alt, and whilst we're holding Shift-Alt, down, 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 this basically creates 4 cursors in all of those locations. Now I can hold Shift and then press End, Control-X to cut that, click here, and then go Shift-Alt, down, 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 Control-V, and it's going to paste them all in the right spot. So that's a pretty cool trick. Now we've got friends with IDs and we can start using them in our table. So how do we do that? If we come back here to the table docs, we'll click on the general section, general, and there's a part here that shows rows, which we can see is required. And look, honestly, when you're first starting out with a component, you probably wouldn't go straight to the API card. You'd scroll down a little bit here and you would find the first place that it's used. So you can see in basic usage, we can click on this little code button, and that gives us a really basic idea of how that component is used. And to get the full example, we can click on all. And often what people will do is they'll just copy paste the example and then they'll tweak that example to suit their own needs. Okay, but scrolling back up here, we can see we need rows. I'll come over here and then add in a QTable and then set the rows equal to our friends. Save it, close out the GUID generator, jump into our app, and we can see that all of the data is now in there. Pretty cool. Now, before we move on, I'm predicting that we're going to run out of space here. Well, not run out, but it's going to get a little bit crowded. So let's extract this list of friends into its own file. Control-Alt-M, that's a hotkey that reveals the current file that you're inside of in your file explorer. So again, that hotkey was Control-Alt-M. And now inside of Pages, I'm just going to create the file here. We'll keep it simple for now. Friends.js. Now, Control-KB to hide that, Control-2 to split here, Control-P, and I'm going to open up the index page. So now we have our friends file on the left and then the index page on the right. Cutting this, we can now say export, paste it directly in there. And now over here, we can do Control space and then import those friends. All right, let's try refreshing the page. And now we can see we get the same thing, but now friends is sitting inside of its own file. Okay, Control W to close that out. Now, you might be thinking to yourself, surely we can take control of the columns. And whenever we have a thought like that, surely we can, or there must be a way to, straight away, we're going to go to the docs to see if it is possible. So, QTable, let's see if we can add some columns. Filter, column. Okay, so we can see there's quite a few mentions of the word column, and we're probably going to find what we're looking for inside of the column category here. There we go. We can add columns, and we can see here the column definition is an array of objects. If we open description, we can even get a better idea of what the props are in those objects. So let's give this a try. Const columns is equal to an array. Okay, again, so that's an array of objects. So let's put an object inside of here, and we can see that the first three props are required. So we're going to need a name, a label, and a field. Okay, the name of this column is going to equal, well, name. It's just a coincidence that they're the same thing. The field is going to equal name, and the label is going to equal name with a capital N. Now, you might be wondering, why do we have to define a name and a field? There is a reason behind this. They're slightly different things, but we're going to talk about that a little bit later on. Okay, now that we have our columns, let's say columns is equal to columns like this, heading back to the Quasar playground, and there we go. Now we've only defined one column, and therefore that's what gets displayed here. By the way, at the time of this recording, Vue recently brought out a new way of setting columns where you don't have to say equals here. If you just say columns like that, it's the same as saying columns is equal to columns. So let's try this, refresh the page just to show that that still works. So that's kind of cool, a different syntax there that you can play around with. Now, next up, I want to make sure that this is aligned to the left. I think it looks a little bit weird aligned to the right. That might make sense with numbers, but doesn't quite look right with something like the name of the person. All right, so let's come up here and scroll down a little bit and see if we can find, oh, there it is, align. Gives us a bit of a description and we can see the different values we can put in there. And of course, in this case, I want to set it equal to left. Align that column to the left. Back at our app, we can see that's now aligned to the left. Really, really easy, and we're using the docs to drive our development now. Let's add another one for email. Copy, paste, Control D to select both of those and say email. And let's set the label equal to email with a capital E, and now it shows up. Next up, notice that we get lines under each of these rows that separates all the values, but there's no lines vertically. Now, this might be desirable for you. It just kind of gives you a bit more space and feels a bit more freeing. But sometimes when you're dealing with lots of data, you might want to see a full cell there. So let's look at how we can do that. Now, the first thing I'm thinking is this is some sort of a separator, a way to separate the data or cell maybe. So maybe we'll come up here and search for the word cell. And if we go to content, there we go. We got something called separator. And if I go to the description, we can see the accepted values there. And by the way, another way you could have discovered this is by pressing enter here under the table, control space, and now we get a list of everything that we have available to us. So this doesn't give us all of the extra information we get from an API card, but this is a quick way to discover what that table can do. So let's type in SEP. Now we can see we get separator. And if I do control space, we can even see those accepted values are showing up directly in our editor. So let's set it equal to vertical and see what that looks like. Okay, so that gives us a line vertically. I guess it's kind of obvious at this point. And let's set that equal to cell, which is going to give us lines all the way around the border of each cell. Great. Let's try a few other things. How about we add a title so that we can see what the table's about? Again, we can come up here and maybe we search for something like heading. Okay, that doesn't show anything. So let's try the word title. Sometimes you have to try a few different words to find what you're looking for. And there we go. We've got title. But honestly, on this case, you probably could have just gone control space, started typing title, and then sort of guessed it from there. Okay, so let's put a title in and set that equal to friends. Coming back, that looks pretty good. I wonder if we can show whether we're loading data. Back to the docs, type in the word loading, and you can see we've got a few things related to loading as well. So I'll come in here and say loading is equal to true. And there we go. We get that mad loading indicator. Maybe we can change the color. So we come up here, we can put in color. And under the style section, we've got a few things. In fact, at this point, how about we clear that out and just go through some of the things available to us in the style section? Let's start with color, dense, and dark. Coming back, let's set the color equal to red. And you can see the loading bar is red. Pagination uses red for the menu, stuff like that. We can say dense to make our table a little bit more dense if we need more space. And what was the other one? That's right, dark. So coming back here, if we set this equal to dark, we'll get rid of dense at the same time. It puts the table into a dark mode. And to show that a little bit better, let's add to the page background -gray -10 to create a really dark gray. And there we go. The table's now designed to work well on a dark background. All right, I'm going to get rid of a few of these, get rid of the background gray, and see what else we can do. Now, these next ones are particularly helpful, flat, bordered, and square, because these are very common for Quasar. So often you'll see components that have a shadow in the background by default. You can easily get rid of that shadow with flat. So again, there's lots of components that sort of start out with a little bit of styling, and you'll always be able to use flat, bordered, and square to change the way the borders work. So let's have a look at that. Back into our app, let's make it flat. So now we have a lot more control over the edges of our table. We can now say bordered to put a border back in. And I often like this design. Sometimes I feel like my apps have a little too much shadow. So I'll just say flat and bordered. And it's a really quick way to get your components still looking nice and contained without having that shadow. And if you don't like the curved borders and you're looking for a more clean cut look, then we can come in here and say square. And now that we've covered props pretty extensively, we're going to quickly cover events. Events tell us when something happens inside of that component. And a great example of this is @rowClick. And if we open the description here, we get an idea of the parameters that it receives, the event, the row, and then the index of that row. Super helpful information. So let's come down here and then say all of the things inside of events. We'll start with an and we'll type in row-click. Let's accept event and row. I'm going to put an underscore for event. Underscore is basically a way of saying, hey, I'm not actually going to use this parameter. And then next up, the row. So then let's just do a console.log of that row. Save it, back into our app, Control-Shift-I. And if I click on one of these rows, we get the console log. So of course, you can imagine this is particularly helpful. Maybe you want to edit that row, so you would show a dialog. Or maybe you want to use the router to take the user to a page that shows more information about that specific friend. So row clicks are a really quick way to tap into that. Okay, closing that out. Another thing to note is sometimes the events have got this @update:, and when you see that @update:, it almost always means that we can model whatever is sitting after the colon. Okay, that's confusing, so let me show you what I mean. When you see something like @update full screen, that means that we can say v-model: full screen, and then we can easily model a value. So let's go ahead and do that. Const full screen is equal to ref, get ref imported, and let's set it equal to false by default. Paste that in there. So now we're modeling the variable full screen with our ref full screen up here. If this full screen value changes, then full screen on the table changes. If full screen on the table changes, then our ref of full screen will change. So the two are in sync. Let's demonstrate that. Q-button. And when you click on this button, then full screen is going to equal the opposite of what full screen currently is. So in other words, we're going to toggle full screen. Let's set a label there equal to full screen, jump back into our app, and it works. Now, there's no way for us to get out of full screen, but you can see that we can now easily click on this button. Full screen is false, so it becomes true. Therefore, full screen on Quasar's table component becomes true, and then the table component uses that to put it into full screen. So that's good to know. Again, the point of this is that when you see @update:, that almost always means that you can say v-model and then the value. And that's pretty much it for events. It's good to have a strong understanding of the difference between props and events. So the way I think of it is props go into the component, events come out of the component. So you'll see here, all of this stuff is putting something inside of the table. We're sending something down into that component. But with @rowClick, we're not sending something down, we're listening for something that happens. And that's why I think of it as coming out of the component. Props go in, events are things that come out. And then v-model is kind of a combination between the two because full screen is going into that component, but the table's also telling us when full screen should change. Okay, I hope you enjoyed this one. In the next video, we're going to go over slots, and you are going to love slots with Quasar. They give you a ridiculous amount of control over your components.